If you shoot for the moon, you'll have the last laugh. I wanted it all. His best of her was half a night in his bath, made imposter of day. Beautiful moon, did I chase you away? The thief in my room could not see in the dark that the moon is for free. If you know how to ask love, better not to ask. I stumbled and I saw that it was not meant to be. You're still hanging there, and you're always out of reach. Oh moon, you're the moon, you are that moon that makes madmen moan. You lured the waves, and you made a crooner croak this lonely tune. I mean, you are that moon, and not a figure of speech. Beautiful moon, you're out of reach. Oh, well, it's been a very, very long journey. I started doing music professionally in around 1997. I think initially I was motivated because my parents were from India, but I was born in Britain and raised in Australia, and I wanted to try and create a musical sound which was representative of all of my different backgrounds, nationalities, which made up my being or my existence. There were practically no Indians on the television at all when I was growing up. Like I grew up really in a very parallel realities. But when I was 16, I decided that I wanted to do music, and I did a lot of, I was into a lot of 60s music, and I had a band, and I was experimenting. But I think when I got to age 20, and I realized that I couldn't ignore this great ancestry of India, like by my ancestry, and I couldn't ignore that, and I wanted to come and connect with that. And I think my interest and my inspiration was like, I was particularly drawn to the sacred music traditions of India. So that's what made me want to come back and research and work with sacred music and spiritual music from South Asia and India. And then I wanted to try and do my own interpretation of those musics that I studied. The first album, Salt Rain, was largely based in London, so it was working with a lot of the Indian diaspora who were in England at the time, but also with some African musicians who were in France and some Western classical musicians, so there was a very, very big mix. when I chose to work with those people, it was really people who were around at the time and who I met and who were very exciting. So one factor is that, you know, you need to, it's a personal connection. It's not like, oh, I am from this tradition. I think, you know, like if you look at maybe Ravi Shankar and Yehudi Menuhin, you know, like that collaboration is like Ravi Shankar is saying, I'm coming from this classical tradition, and Yehudi Menuhin comes from this tradition, and we are meeting two great traditions, you know, and we're making it. It wasn't like that at all. It's more like you're trying to cross over and make a connection, and it's really not to do with I want to work with this tradition or that tradition. I work with people, so it's like about making a direct connection with a person and just then connecting with those people. So with the first album, I worked with, you know, African, Indian and European musicians. But from the second album, and particularly the third album, I decided to come back and work more with Carnatic musicians. And I worked with like the people who were really of the moment here, like Embar Kannan and Gautam Karthik, and I spent a lot of time at, you know, with Aruna Sairam at that moment, and you know, I really that was a very interesting moment. But the one thing that was very interesting about that time was working with the Velalar community, because I didn't know at that time that there was such a big difference between Brahmin and Velalar, because my upbringing, particularly my upbringing in England, was very insular, and I saw things very much through the lens of my parents. But I didn't realize there was a whole subculture here, and then learning about like Dasi's music, and, you know, going back a bit, but also the whole Velala tradition of tablas and nadaswarams. I became very interested by the Velala musician, like by the tablas and nadaswarams, and then I became quite friendly with those musicians, and I wanted to know more. Which that was the beginning of a journey into a lot of the Murugan music, because I studied a lot of the Bhakti traditional music, but also Tevaram and Tiruvachikam, and I did that through that Velala connection, which that door which opened. But yeah, to answer your question, I think that the connection is really about people, you know. So it's like you work with a group of people. It's not like you want to say anything about cultural meetings, more about people, minds who are meeting. So it's like really my work is all about sort of people and the connections that I have with people, and how much, you know, that those interactions stimulate you, and where you can go with those people, like how you can follow a particular route with people. Well, I think I have to give some credit to my partner in crime, who's my husband and guitarist Sam Mills. We work together. We have a very interesting way of working together. I think it's like that's also a lot to do with the way that the music is produced. And Sam has a very particular background. He in another incarnation actually has a PhD in anthropology, that's quite informative. I mean, it informs how he produces. So it's not just music. There's a lot of different thought and philosophy which goes into it. So I would say that together we're both interested. We're interested in music which is transcendent, and music which can take you to maybe beyond yourself, and so we're interested in spiritual traditions, in religious traditions, but also, you know, we're interested in modern music, like who's actually doing that in modern. There's quite a lot, like, you know, if you look at the 60s, and so collectively we're quite interested in, you know, exploring liminal spaces or spaces which are going beyond regular existence, and I think that that's something really that we do together, and so that's I think it's in the production, but it's also in the particular way that dynamic that we have together. I think it's just following your curiosity, and also following what is interesting, you at a particular moment. And also, you know, like when you follow your curiosity, it leads you to places which helps you to discover new instruments or new voices or new. Yes, we did folk, but we've also recently been working a lot with Western classical orchestras.
Okay.
But our most recent journey is we've been to Indonesia working with the Gamelan musicians. So Gamelan may not be that well known here. The connections between Tamil Nadu and Java are absolutely, they're so strong, right?
Even the Ramayana.
The Ramayana as well, but also, you know, like Raja Chola, he made expeditions to Java and Sumatra, and, you know, the Chola dynasty colonized Java, and Java is full of Chola architecture. You know, like there's Arjuna cave, and you know, like there's all Yudhishthira cave. You know, like there's all these like Mahabharata, and all of the names, they're all Sanskrit names. So you have like Draupadi, and you have Ramayana, you have Sita. Like it's full of like, there's so much amazing connection, but it's not obvious at first. But you know, because going there to Indonesia in 2015 was a complete shock, because they have this particular music, it's gamelan, and it's these like sets of large gongs and metallic instruments, like they're like xylophones, but they're all in different shapes and sizes. And the tonal system is like completely different to any kind of Indian system or like any Western system. It's like it's completely another planetary world. So like actually that first year of going to, well, in 2015 we went there, I mean we went there for a few months first initially, and it was like being in another planet, like just hearing the music, it was like another planetary system. Actually to work with those instruments was so interesting and so complicated, because you couldn't make head or tail of it in the beginning, but it really took quite a lot of work to try and decode it. But then some of them now, I mean, I think that having my Tamil background really helped, because I think that those, that Chola influence and the Tamil Nadu influence, the Hindu influence there, was also, that was probably quite responsible for shaping the way gamelan sounds, you know. And, you know, with their kandang, you can see there's similarities with mridangam. So, I mean, you were asking about different instruments. So this is like one example of, this has been a very long study. So we went there in 2015, and now it's 2020. So this has been going on for, like, it was quite a long process of working. But I guess that just going there was so strong, just hearing those sounds and just having that desire to want to try and absorb that, or try to build some kind of bridge which would connect Britain, India and Indonesia. And I think that we did do that. Okay, well, it's very difficult to describe. Some things are the easiest. I mean, sometimes some of the most successful pieces are things that I've dreamt or have come out quite spontaneously. But not all pieces are like that, obviously, because to get something in a dream is very rare. You miss stuff, you know, because sometimes you sleep and then you hear things in your sleep, and then you're not quick enough, like, or you wake up and then you haven't quite. So those things, a lot of those things have been very successful, or starting with a dream. So like starting with a sort of essence that's come from a dream. So you're holding like one kind of piece of the puzzle. And then sometimes like other things just start attaching itself to the initial piece that you've sort of collected. That's one way of doing things. And then there's another thing that Sam and I work together. So obviously Sam creates some big structures sometimes, and sometimes we work like that. So it's different. We have a very interesting process between us. Okay, well, I can't actually say that I've actually joined the mainstream film industry, because actually I did it largely on my own terms. So the film was Raju Murugan, who directed Joker. He approached me about 2 years ago, and he had written this story called Gypsy. And one of the characters in his film was Susheela Raman, or a fictitious version of Susheela Raman. And then he told me, he explained that he'd been in Varanasi, and then he'd bought one of my CDs, like old CDs, Love Trap, and he'd fallen in love with this CD, and then he'd like imagined this whole thing, and he'd written this story which had come to, and the music was very much a part of the story. So the character of Susheela Raman's quite important character in the film. So he said, would you like to come and act as Susheela Raman? I've never acted before. And then he said, I need you to do 2 songs as well. So he was very interested in our, a lot of the songs we did around the Murugan culture, some of them have become very successful. Some of them become quite controversial, actually, and some of the old videos from 2012. But that was one of the repertoires he really liked, was this Murugan things that I'd studied and had later interpreted. And he wanted us to do a version of an old Murugan song called Ullam Murugudaya, which we did. And sadly, actually, that's the censor board has cut that from the film. So that's actually it's not going to be in the Indian version, but it's going to be in the international version. But the other music is it's Ase Mugam, which is a version of the Bharadiyar poem Ase Mugam. I think that when I first started coming here and started working and meeting people in the industry, there was very. Okay, first let me start with film music, because I think in old Bollywood or old Collywood, even I'm talking about 1940 or 1950, I think there was a very free mix of culture. Like there was a lot of international influences coming in, and there was a natural way those 40s and 50s pieces were just absorbing things from outside, yes, but yet also having a sound of their own. I think that kind of disappeared for some time. And then you would have these conversations with people in Bombay, and they had a few references that they liked. They would like, okay, we like Pink Floyd, and there was a few kind of things that were the determining factors, but there were, in my opinion, probably a lot of, because in England, if you look at the Beatles or the Rolling Stones, they had a lot of black African influence, because the slaves who traveled, who were brought from to America from, it was because of the black population that the jazz happened, and jazz was hugely influential in America for mainstream music. But also there was like blues, and there was rock and roll, so all of these things had a huge impact on the Beatles or the Stones, because the Beatles were like buying stuff like that. They were importing all these records, and then they were learning how like these things were done, and so that was like one thing that was very. It's like almost like the mainstream of the 60s rock music. It was so important, the black part. But like bands like Pink Floyd didn't really have that black connection. So I always used to find that actually some of the black connection was missing, like in those days. Here, because maybe some of the white things were being referenced, but the white things were being referenced without the connection to the black thing, the black influences. But I think now maybe there's more awareness, so in the past 20 years. And also I think that Indians also look to their own folk now, folk musics and tribal musics and things like that, and maybe see them more as an asset now than they did 20 years ago. Because, you know, people I think who were making rock 20 years ago were like, rock, this is rock, and rock should be done like this, right? But actually rock is some of the most folk music from Tamil Nadu, like Tapatama, that is in its own way, that's its own rock, you know, or like, you know, some tribal music, you know, it's really got its own rock in it. But I think now maybe Indians are more proud, and they look into their own culture, and then they're more free to just use that, and like the freedom that they had in Bollywood and Hollywood, and in, you know, where you could just, there are no rules really, like there's no, you don't have to stay in this box or that box, you can use, you know, whatever is in your flow. So this folk, I think that's one of the things that's probably strengthened the music in India, the fact that people accept their own cultures more. But I mean, I think the most controversial thing is, at the moment, the current thing is with the Murugan repertoire, because there's a lot of trolls, and there's a lot of troll videos. Actually, people have made energy and put in loads of time to create these videos where they've intercut them with like clips from Tamil films, and made these troll videos which now have millions and millions of views, like the troll videos. So there's more controversy around the Murugan repertoire, but you know, actually having said that, I don't do that repertoire anymore. I mean, I was doing that repertoire from 2009 to, you know, about 2013 I stopped. I didn't do it anymore. I mean, it was just only that one period, but there's some very strong videos which, you know, we had some concert, like there was one concert from London, from the Queen Elizabeth Hall, and that's the one that everybody watches, and they just get really horrified, and you know, and there's lots of people saying, oh, this shouldn't be allowed, and you know, like there's all this death threats. You know, it's like it's quite sort of very it's very intense. Everything's very intense. I think so. I mean, I think so. I think, you know, I think, you know, like that whatever, sometimes, you know, we've done an interpretation and that's been reaccepted in many cases. Like, for example, excuse me, when we did one from that concert, Velundu was, because I studied with this really amazing guy called Dharmapuram Saminathan, and he was like one of the old Shaivite guys, and he, you know, a real serious guy. Like he had jata, and he lived like, you know, he was living like a very simple, like a real monastic kind of life with his, you know, he was not at all like into you know, into any self-promotion or hype, but, you know, like so he was my teacher, and he taught me Velundu. He very sadly, he died actually, you know, when I was working with him. But that Velundu we did with Pakistani Sufi musicians. And like those songs now, they've gone back into the Sufi dargah. People sing them, but they sing them with all our Maname choruses, like Velundu. Like so I think overall in time people have adopted them, but maybe they just take a bit longer for people to sort of understand them, or to be able to, you know, or to accept them. Maybe in the beginning it's quite hard. I think that was what happened with the Nagumomo, and it was very early on, and it was hard for people to accept. But we've got a new album which we're starting to work on at the moment, and I think we're going to work more with Western Classical Orchestra on this project. But the Gamelan project still goes on, and that's taken, again, it's like, you know, as I said, because, you know, we you know, the time frame of putting out an album, you know, it doesn't, the way that Sam produces, the way that we work together on albums, they don't work like a pop record. Like a pop record, a traditional pop record is like a movie. If you put a movie out, you have a release, and then you have, you know, like a wind of publicity, and then it's gone. It's not like that. It's like, I think with our production, it's more like sort of slow diffusion. So you put it out, and then slowly it sort of starts to work, you know. So with the Gamelan project, it started in 2015, and it's starting to become known now. Like, it's starting to become known in Indonesia, and it's taken 4 years or 5 years for that to work. So the Gamelan project is still very alive. I mean, I'd love to come and present that in Chennai, because I think people would be really blown away because of these connections, and the way that we've approached the Gamelan project is it's Britain, India, and Indonesia. It's like a triangular sort of set of viewpoints, and vantage points, into the music, and I think people here might find it really fascinating. So that's still very, very current.